Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the Skyhawk build. In today's video we are going to paint the model, so get yourself comfortable and enjoy the process. This video comes to you in cooperation with PCBWay, Magic Factory and MRP Paints. After I attended some forgotten seam lines, I completed the primer stage, at least the part with the black primer, using the gallery Mobius SP airbrush. For such tasks it is convenient to be able to load an airbrush with a lot of paint. The next step of the plan involved a bunch of seemingly unrelated objects, which I covered with a coat of MRP gloss varnish. Next up, metallizers. The Skyhawk does not seem to have particularly eventful exhaust heat shielding, at least not notable on the images I have looked at. I however decided to add a bit more seasoning. First things first, I applied AK's steel metallizer on the heat shields, the FODs, the drag chute cover and on the boarding ladder. Next I loaded some MRP burnt iron in the airbrush and added that to the edges of the shield. Other than that, I covered the various actuators and shock absorber rods with alclad chrome. After a few hours I attempted to buff it to a nice shine, but instead I went down to the black paint. I always forget not to use alclad. The easy fix was quick spray with AK polished aluminium. I left those alone to properly flush off. After painting the bomb fuses and the refueling boom in steel, I left them alone to cure. The light housings under the wingtips I painted with gallery's metallic markers. While waiting for the metallics to cure, I decided that I can start applying the squiggly lines of the marbling. Here I used MRP Insignia White diluted to a 50-50 ratio with Mr. Leveling Thinner. This mix I applied using gallery's Mobius 0.2mm airbrush. I could not go around the areas that needed masking anymore, so I spent almost an entire bench session masking various bits and pieces. For the smaller stuff, like the tiny actuators, I used only masking fluid. For the bigger items, I used either only masking tape or a combination with masking fluid. I also finished the black basing on all parts that are going to be painted in white. The base coat of Insignia White on the entire lower surface of the airplane along with the whole bunch of bits and pieces is ready. The next batch of details painted in Insignia White is mostly going to hang underneath the airplane. Since this is going to render them slightly obscured, I decided to do some experimenting. First I applied a couple of light layers, getting the tone into the shaded white area. Then I started applying more layers only on top surfaces. That created artificially shaded lower surfaces, or surfaces which face in the opposite direction of the light source. How this will look on the finished model is to be seen, but so far I think it looks promising. Also, I made sure that the effect is not too strong, so if nothing else, there should be no harm. If you are after a rich and vibrant red color, the best primer for the job is pink. So I had pink paint session. Other than some masking on the belly, for the rest I relied on carefully airbrush positioning so that the edges can shield the other side from the paint. Here I used Mr. Surfacer 1500 pink primer, tint to about 50-50 ratio with Mr. Leveling Thinner. My gallery Mobius 0.3 airbrush did a great job once again. The red is on. All those elements are painted in red on the real airplanes for two main reasons. One is for deck crew safety, and the second and more practical reason is that with the red colored internal surfaces it is much easier to spot when something is not fully closed. The next bench session turned into a masking session once again. Very tedious, at least the air brakes fit in the closed position, so I don't need to mask them, and then the base. The sliders for the slats are left uncovered because those will have to be painted in some metallic color. Other than that, I removed the 3D printed pilot figure and then the helmet back from the supports. To remove the red and pink overspray, I applied another coat of black primer over the airplane, the internal faces of the bay doors, and primed the pilot figure. This video is sponsored by PCBWay. Most of you know them for custom PCBs, but they also offer professional 3D printing services. Whether you're after a resin, SLS, or even metal parts, PCBWay delivers high precision results perfect for model building or custom tools. Uploading your design is easy. Just head to their website, choose your material, and get an instant quote. No back and forth, no surprises. If you are into customizing your builds or prototyping parts, definitely check them out. Link is in the description. Next up, using the zenithal highlighting technique, I painted the bay doors and the pilot. First I applied a coat of white overall to put a grayish tone everywhere, and then applied several more coats from above. In the case of the bay doors, above means from the hinges. The pilot figure looks even better with the contrasting highlights and shadows. The first stage of the upper camouflage color is complete. Using my Mobius 0.2 I applied a lot of light gold gray squiggly lines. Also I filled the small access panels so that they can get more prominent. Panel lines were generally avoided. The demarcation lines between the insignia white on the belly and the light gold gray top camo color I applied freehand. Also, I made them quite solid. On many faded aircraft it can be seen that the demarcation lines are less faded, which indicates more paint. Here the difference between the colors is so small that the demarcation line can be imagined rather than seen. Step 2 of the pre-shading process consists of panel line highlights, painstakingly applied if I may add. The color of choice here is the all-encompassing MRP insignia white. The third and final step of the pre-painting shenanigans. Actually, those were 3 individual steps, but small enough that I was able to squeeze them in one bench session. So first I applied dark gold gray on several panels, to make them that little bit different from the neighboring ones. The so-called paneling technique. To put an emphasis on the natural shapes of the aircraft, I boosted the natural shadows with careful application of NATO black paint. With that done, it was only logical to bust out the insignia white and boost the natural highlights areas of the subject. I will admit I liked it. Now, let's not screw it up with the blending. After 7 layers of MRP's light gold gray diluted at about 50-50 with Mr. Rapid Thinner, I think I can call it good. At this point there is nothing else to distract the eye and the pre-shading is a bit too harsh. But once the decals are applied, the red is unmasked and all the weathering is done, we should be safe. The instructions wrongfully suggest that the intake ramps should be entirely red. The reference images clearly show that the leading edge is light gold gray. So, in about 30 minutes I masked and painted the parts appropriately. I think you know very well that masking took 95% of the time. With that done, I applied some masking to protect the fresh paint from overspray and painted the slat rails in dark aluminum. Finally, I was able to remove some of the masks and enjoy the results. For the anti-glare area in front of the windshield, Magic Factory provides pre-cut masks. This of course is very welcome. I also masked the top of the tail, which had a decent amount of light gold grey overspray on it. That was followed by a layer of Mr. Surfacer 1500 Black. As good of a black color as this primer is, I wanted to have some variation, and the NATO black from MRP gave me an excellent, not so black to apply over the base color. I did not apply the NATO black over the panel lines, giving the impression of a slightly faded black. The same treatment I gave to the tail top and the rudder. Since the rudder will be masked for further painting, I left the paint to rest. While this is happening, I went ahead and glued the intake ramps in place. The fit here is near perfect. The fact that I could put those pieces in place painted and I got no seam line issues speaks volumes. Unfortunately, the kit does not provide anything to save the builder from its misery in regards to the tail art. A decal, for instance, would have been a welcome help, so I embarked on a long and tedious masking job. After that was done, I was faced with an issue. If I paint the yellow directly on the black, it would take many layers and will have green hue. Pink primer will solve that issue, however, it makes an issue of its own. The edges of the mask areas will remain pink after the tape is removed. And here is how I solved this puzzle. A couple of layers of yellow to seal the edges were followed by a coat of pink primer. After that, I applied the yellow over the primer for a nice, rich and vibrant result. Also, after the removal of the mask, there is no pink inside. Small victory. The painting isn't over yet, as I have a boatload of weapons to cover. First off, I masked the fuses using strips of tape and liquid mask. I also masked the strips of the arrestor hook. If I was a bit smarter, when I painted the fuses in steel, I would have covered the yellow band area in metallic as well. That would allow me to directly apply the yellow paint. However, I did not foresee the benefits, and now I had to apply a layer of pink primer before the RLM02 yellow paint. Now the paint will have some to cure, and we will move on from there. After another masking session, the yellow bands were protected, and I applied a layer of black surface primer to hide the yellow overspray. Next, I put some white oil paint on a piece of cardboard, took a good hard bristled brush, and dry brushed in some effects. Those were mostly streaks, but also some highlights, and there was also some stippling on the bottom of the bumps. All in all, I do enjoy the gnarly look of them. The first weapons to fall under the airbrush were the rocket launchers. The choice for paint fell on the post-World War II olive drop from MRP. That of course was pretty well diluted with the glorious Mr. Rapid Thinner. This time, 5 layers were sufficient to cover the dry brushed oil paint effects, so that they can timidly peek through the paint but still envelop the otherwise boring surface with pleasing texture. The painting of the bombs went a bit differently from the rocket launchers. For starters, here I used Tamiya paint, XF62 olive drop to be specific. That was as usual heavily diluted with Mr. Rapid Thinner. It would appear that the matte paint hides the underlying effects quite significantly. With each new layer, while wet, I could see the oil paint effects, however after the paint cured to its matte finish, the effects were harder to distinguish. I hope that after a final layer of satin varnish, the effect will be resurrected to some extent. Also, you may be able to see the olive green tails of the snake eyes did not suffer the same way, as the paint had much more of a satin finish. Agonizingly close to the final stroke of the painting stage, I ironically had to revert to the paintbrush. A few small items were in dire need of beige or black paint, and I chose to save myself the time to mask around those small areas. After I was done playing around with the paintbrush, I applied semi-gloss varnish on top of the model and on a whole bunch of parts. And with that, this episode is complete. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, happy modeling, fellas.